Hi students, in the last few lessons we've been talking about the French resistance and asking the question, how do people respond when faced with evil? And so I wanted to continue that question in this lesson for Christian Life Studies and talk about the stories of three German men, Tillich, Bonhoeffer and Niebuhr. Now these three men had at one point in time came together in America in the early or the late 1930s, early 40s, and they were torn apart by what Hitler was doing in their beloved Germany, and they had decisions to make about what would they do in the face of this evil threatening their country. Let me tell you about a little bit about each of them. So first of all, Tillich was a brilliant professor and writer, and he was working at Frankfurt University in the 1930s, early 1930s, and he was very, very outspoken against National Socialism and what he saw as the dangers of the rising conservatism of the Hitler movement, and he was very, very critical of it. So when Hitler was elected Chancellor in 1933, it wasn't long before Tillich lost his job as the professor at the university, and his life came under threat. In America, he had a friend, Niebuhr, who was a professor at the Union Theological College. And so Niebuhr offered him a position in America where he could teach theology and Christian moral theory to students in America. So he offered him a home, and so Tillich gathered his family together and fled Germany to the safety of the United States, where he took up this position at Union Theological College and became one of the great Christian moral teachers of the 20th century. From America, he used radio to broadcast into Germany messages encouraging German Christians to stay strong, to resist the ideas of Hitler, to do what they could to combat the evil. But he did it from the distance, the safe distance of the United States. And he struggled, obviously, with the difficulty of having to accept that from so far away there was little he could do. This contrasted quite starkly with the story of another man, also a friend of Niebuhr. And this man was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Now, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Christian minister, a great theologian. He was wealthy and good-looking, and he was very, very outspoken against Nazism, and particularly the anti-Semitism of the Nazis. He saw this as an absolute aberration of, an abhorrent thing, and it's something that God would detest. And so he was very outspoken about this. He obviously attracted a lot of negative attention from the Nazis for his position. He was also very critical of the German church, who he saw as not standing up to Hitler in the way they ought to, and he saw them as being far too willing to collaborate or overlook or turn a blind eye to what Hitler was doing, particularly in his persecution of Jews. So Bonhoeffer began an underground church, an anti-Nazi underground church, which he thought preserved the true spirit of German Christianity, particularly protecting the Reformation ideas of Martin Luther and what he saw as the heart of German Christianity. He also began an underground Bible college or theological college, training ministers in how to resist Hitler, how to clarify their thinking, how to separate what was Christian from what was political, and to resist that idea of German superiority and the need for Germany to be strong or Germany to be superior, how to get that out of their thinking and to hold on to the Christian gospel of humility and service and love your neighbour as yourself. This, of course, made him a target of the Nazis, and when it was very clear that the net was closing in on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he fled Germany and arrived in America in 1939. It wasn't long before Dietrich Bonhoeffer believed that he had made a terrible mistake in leaving Germany, and the fact that other Christians were left behind under the Nazi regime, going into concentration camps, being persecuted, murdered for their adherence to the Christian gospel, tortured him. So he decided he'd made the wrong decision and that he had to go back to Germany and, if necessary, live with German Christians, suffer with them, and if necessary, die with them, rather than live in safety in the United States. So he booked a ticket on the very last ship going across the Atlantic from the United States to Germany, and he quickly reconnected with the underground church, and then he had to decide what to do. How far was he willing to go in his resistance to Hitler? So first of all, he began to help smuggle Jews out of Germany, and then he became aware of an assassination plot to kill Hitler. Now, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a very devout Christian, and obviously he knew the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill, but he believed that if he could participate in a plot that would get rid of Hitler, that this was a reasonable thing to do, although he knew that he would be breaking a commandment of God. He felt if this meant he lost his salvation, that he went to hell for this sin of helping to murder Hitler, then that was a sacrifice he was willing to make. He believed if Hitler was out of the way, it would make a significant difference to what then happened in Germany, and he was willing not just to risk his life, but his soul, to bring that about. Now, the tragedy is that the assassination attempt was discovered, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer was arrested and put in a concentration camp, and Hitler managed to live on for a number more years. Just prior to the end of the war, Bonhoeffer was taken out of the concentration camp and he was executed. Just a few weeks later, Hitler committed suicide, and you know that the war then came to an end. Now, while this is a tragic story, the interesting bit is what happened in terms of Niebuhr, the German professor back in America, watching his two friends, Tillich and Bonhoeffer, and going, which of the men made the right decision? Did they both make a reasonable decision? Was God calling them to different responses in the face of evil? Tillich, who stayed in America in safety, became a great theological teacher and helped in the way he could from a position where he really couldn't do very much. Or Bonhoeffer, who felt that no, he couldn't stay in safety but must return to Germany and do what he could. Niebuhr pondered this for a long time, and eventually he wrote a prayer, which I think you've probably heard before, maybe are very familiar with. And the prayer went something like this: Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. You can see in this prayer that he wrote that he's holding in his mind his two friends, Tillich and Bonhoeffer. One who had to find the peace of knowing that he could not do much to change what was happening in Germany. One who had the courage to go back and try and change what was happening. And Niebuhr, who sat in the middle, Lord, give me the wisdom to know the difference between the things I can change and the things that I cannot change, and the courage to act on those I can. I hope that you've found this explanation of the prayer as moving as I have.